Good afternoon and welcome to the Virtually Speaking Podcast, episode number 212. My name is Pete Fletcher, a.k.a. Pedro Arrow, and joining me as usual is my good friend, Mr. John Nicholson. John, welcome back.
It's good to be back. It feels a little weird. I feel like I've been gone for weeks, but it's been a relatively short time.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure you can hear I'm a little congested. I've been in the UK on vacation for a week. Didn't get COVID, but I definitely got a common cold. And I was busy enjoying some great music. I went to a concert. But yeah, you were a little busier than I was. You were actually making another child and bringing another child into this world. So officially, congratulations.
Thank you. It's going to be a good month off, but I figured I could swing an hour of diaper changing and feeding times to come visit the podcast.
I appreciate that. You make it sound like it's such a sacrifice when you know you're just escaping those diaper changes and those feedings. But we're glad to have you, man. Especially on this episode, we're talking. We all know we talk a lot about VMware Cloud on AWS and cloud in general. And I want to talk a little bit about cloud migrations and some considerations so we're bringing on one of the experts in this area. He comes from a company that many of you may already be familiar with. It's a consulting company called House of Brick. Nick Walter, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, guys, for having me.
Yeah, Nick. So the first time I heard you, Nick, I actually heard you on an AWS podcast talking a little bit about a migration with the Scottish government, and I found that to be a really interesting conversation. That was a little while back. I know since then you've done a ton of migrations with VMware to VMware Cloud on AWS, so I would love to pick your brain on that. But why don't you tell us a little bit, set the stage for us, like what exactly does House of Brick do, and why do we care?
Absolutely. We do a couple different things, mostly focused around relational databases. That's really our background, a couple of decades of experience there, particularly Oracle and SQL Server. And what we've really been focused on in the last 5 years is two things. One, as you mentioned, hot topic, cloud. So cloud migrations, AWS, Azure, VMware Cloud, lots of different migration projects in that area. And they're not all the same. People say cloud migration, that's the process of picking up your stuff and dropping it in the cloud. And sometimes that's all there is to it. But a lot of people do themselves a disservice by taking a very simplistic approach to the problem, end up spending a lot of money on software licensing or things like that they don't need to do. So what we help people do is really put a solid plan around those cloud migrations, especially with relational databases that are very expensive software, very expensive to license. Sometimes the rules are different in the cloud. If you don't take the time to plan well, we've seen people make, 6 or 7 figure mistakes. So that's kind of where we exist is, no, why don't you bring us in first? We'll help you plan this really well, assess everything you need to do. So that's kind of one of the primary focuses. And the other one is cloud governance. Because a lot of people, as I said, find it very easy to get into trouble if they don't understand some arcane things about software licensing. We have some products that we sell that can help manage that, for our customers, keep an eye on it, alarm if things have gone wrong, be proactive about preventing those kind of problems.
Well, and my experience with House of Brick from the very first days was going to a VMworld session. You guys have been a speaker countless times at VMworld, as well as some other joint forums we do for DBAs. And if you have any questions about Oracle licensing or database licensing in general, I encourage you to go find the replay. Listeners, go find the replays, pause the podcast, go watch the replay, bookmark that for future, and then realize that this stuff is, kind of complicated and go call them. I mean, I thought software licensing was weird when I was a VDI admin and dealing with the VDA license, whether the iPad was in the parking lot or the building and had a different license kind of thing. It has nothing on like you say, the 7-figure oops you can make, with a database. So, that said, talking about, the nature of these migrations, we can talk about the licensing, but thankfully this is not a licensing only podcast. Let's talk a bit about the application migration. So there's different approaches at different layers. And, we could do this at a vMotion layer. We can do this at an app layer. We can move to PaaS. We could containerize things if we want to be DevOps hipsters. What are you seeing people choose kind of, and why? Can we dig into that?
No, that's a super interesting question. I think especially the latter part of your statement there about there's so many ways to do it has induced some analysis paralysis in some of the clients that I've worked with. Where you go in and we're starting to work with them and we're saying, let's plan out your cloud migration. Let's look at what you need to do. And they say, well, okay, so step one of our plan is rewrite all the apps from scratch to containers. Step two is learn Kubernetes. Step three is, you see people doing this. And I encourage a little bit of, modernization where it makes sense. But honestly, I kind of encourage, and I know a lot of engineers are about to cringe, I kind of encourage lift and shift, the simplest possible way to the cloud. Because, and follow my reasoning here, I love all these modernization ideas. I love containerizing everything. I love making sure you've got the right technologies to have smooth, low-cost, efficient, high reliability, high-performance operations. These are all super important things to me. But if you're kind of trying to string out some legacy platform for 4 more years of operational service while you do that, you're just setting yourself up for some trouble. So where I've actually had a lot of success is kind of flipping the script and saying the right approach is lift and shift now. And if you're already in VMware, there's some really, really easy things we can do to get you, directly to the cloud with minimal fuss and muss. And then once you're there, you're going to go, but wait a minute, where's all these promised cloud benefits? Where's the flexibility? Where's the cost savings? Well, that's where part 2 comes in. Part 2 is where you say, okay, we got to the cloud. The finance people are happy. We stopped paying for whatever the on-prem data center was, or server closet or whatever you've got.
Yeah.
We're decommissioning hardware. We're getting away from hardware refresh cycles. Now we can start devoting development resources to modernizing some of our application stack. Microservices is the word you always hear in this context. Could we refactor existing monolithic applications into microservices, take advantage of containerization, automatic scalability, things like this?
So, I mean, talking about that journey, I guess, of getting to the cloud and that lift and shift, which I like that. I fully agree with your hypothesis here. One of the things, talking to some customers recently, that I had kind of forgotten about is when people think about their data center, not everybody bought a vBlock. Not everyone bought a FlexPod. And so you often, and I jokingly call out the CI block monstrosities, but the one good thing about them was your entire rack had a common SKU and support refresh cycle.
Sure.
And the reality is most people today, they've got a storage array they bought a year ago because they were out of storage. They've got servers that are 4 years old. They've got switches that the networking team, depending on, whether we fed them enough last week, or either hungry for more ports or not. I don't know. Those guys are weird. And it's what they called was the bubble cost. And it's when you're trying to get to the cloud, you can, if you move everything now, you just bought a bunch of assets that you're sweating down. Or, maybe like you say, the co-location cost. Oh, we've got to re-sign this agreement. And, I love my friends at Eternap or somewhere, but, they know that you already have a sunk cost there and they're going to try to squeeze you for a long commit. And so I guess that this leads to the lift and shift is great where it makes sense and you don't have a lot of assets that are wasted, or you can get out quickly enough that you're not forced into another refresh on one of these, this Gantt chart of 14 things in the data center. I guess at least cables don't have a refresh cycle. But the other side of it also is when you're looking at that is sometimes it may make sense of, well, there's this new project coming in and it's going to push my network ports or my storage or something. Maybe I'm going to land that first, or I'm going to migrate some things first. Do you see like a segmented migration, or do you see just people pull the ripcord and try to burn the way, roll a Molotov cocktail in the data center on the way out?
Yes, I see what you're talking about there. The idea that instead of trying to just holistically migrate an entire data center with 19 different application stacks maintained by 19 different teams and 5 different business divisions, all considered stakeholders, that gets complicated. So sometimes people take the approach of, okay, new apps go cloud first, and maybe we migrate things onesie twosie. as makes sense, as the application team that handles that has bandwidth to address the issue. I actually don't see a lot of great outcomes from that. And let me frame that appropriately. Every company I've ever dealt with has that like 5 to 10% of their tech stack that I call the bottom feeders, the stuff right on the bottom. And that is the stuff, not that it's bad stuff, it's working IT, but it's the stuff that there's what I call the fear factor around. You can't touch it. Maybe the tribal knowledge is gone. Maybe the team.
Oh, this is the Novell platform. This is the HR platform that's running on Novell. Yeah, and
right.
We're
Exactly.
gonna have to pull Bob out of retirement, or resuscitate Bob. He had a heart attack, and he's in the long gone. So
right, exactly. And every company has some of these. And what the onesie twosie approach does is let them put off dealing with it. And technical debt is like any other debt; it accrues interest. The longer you put off dealing with this stuff, the harder it is. I have come into customers before who said, "Hey, we're 80% in the cloud. Not all of our mainline applications up there. It's just HR, like you said, or inventory management, or some legacy piece of something."
It's always on an ancient database too. I feel like it's running some database that like.
Please don't update it.
Right.
Well, it's not SQL. It's not Oracle.
It cannot be rebooted.
Yeah, it's some ancient, weird database platform that got bought by a company that got bought by a company that got acquired by a company. And there's like the entire support and engineering is Fred. Like you call and you might be 4 hours because Fred's on hold for 4 hours because Fred's busy. Are you seeing, getting back to, I guess I love that kind of that debt analogy. I also like the toxic waste analogy. It's like having a can of oozing toxic waste sitting in the corner and we're all just pretending it doesn't exist. But you guys do database migrations. Some of that of getting cloud ready, is that getting on standardized platforms? Is that saying, hey, we're going to get off DB2, or we're going to get off of a mainframe, or we're going to get off of some ancient, we've got some some Unix or Solaris that the processor architecture isn't one of the 12 I'm familiar with.
Sure.
Are those some of the projects you've seen have to get done, or?
Absolutely. And honestly, standardization drives, I'm not a huge fan. I understand the benefits of standardizing across enterprise platforms, wherever possible. But going back to our bottom feeders, our toxic waste, if you've got things you're afraid to touch, how do you standardize them, right? So those are sometimes the tricky ones that we do get called in for and can help with. Had one just 9 months ago, HPUX, older system. I'm trying to remember the specific, like a Superdome or something. Good platform, great platform in its time.
No, the Superdome was like 14 nines of availability,
Yeah, great platform. But they don't sell parts for this particular model anymore. And the customer was like, is that a bad sign? If something broke, we couldn't get replacement parts. Might be time to do something about this thing we've been afraid to touch for a decade. And that's where, we came in and said, oh boy, all right, you've got a lot of technical debt. It was Oracle-based application for a pretty major company and was running a key portion of their business on a very ancient version of Oracle. So we had to come in and say, okay, time to get this in the cloud. Let's move to a newer version of Oracle. So we have to solve the problems of moving to a newer version of Oracle. We had to help them port a bunch of operational jobs from HPUX to Linux. Luckily, that's not a huge jump. We're staying in the Unix family there. Rebuild your test and dev, give you a new disaster recovery strategy, give you a new high availability strategy, test backup and restore. There's a lot of aspects. The phrase I use a lot is that data is gravity. I'm not the originator of that. I'm sure you've heard it before.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. But these big legacy databases sometimes are the anchors that are keeping you from, moving big application segments up to the cloud. And I do advocate whenever possible, address the difficult ones first. If you can get the right mix of outside help And inside people getting trained and experienced and learning the cloud technologies you've chosen, and this is not a statement specific to any cloud, this is a very generic statement. If you do the most difficult one first, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. You will experience a short period of pain, and then after that, everything will seem like a relief.
Yeah.
So on the data as gravity, one of the kind of questions I always have about database migrations is what happens when you're trying to, people don't realize how interconnected modern enterprise apps sometimes are. You know, I remember seeing this diagram, I think it was like healthcare.gov, that had to tap databases in like 6 different federal departments and things. And of course, I'm sure one of them was on HPUX. But this is one of the questions is, you know, sometimes the latency, you know, you can't stretch that application easily without doing unnatural things. Or you have things that, you know, operate on broadcast or something, or multicast or something barbaric that doesn't exist in the cloud. Are you seeing people try to clean that up and have like a stage area where you build out some VMs, you clean it up to a modern Oracle or SQL local, and then you vMotion that out? Or do you see people try to cross that WAN chasm, you know, the Grand Canyon of 50 milliseconds to my AWS region, and replatform at the same time?
The answer is yes and no. The biggest problem, you described a very real problem and one I deal with every day, but you didn't describe the biggest aspect of that problem. The biggest aspect of that problem is that generally when I get involved in projects, clients don't know where 80% of those interdependencies are.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, VMware sells things, VRNI, to help, you know, trace all the connections, and there's a whole secondary market of vRealize has gone after that challenge a couple of times. Absolutely. William, we did a podcast with him on that, but yeah, that's an interesting thing. Is you're right, the customer doesn't even realize the dependency chains often. Right.
What'll happen? This could be any one of my customers in the last 2 years. Here's how it always plays out. We go in, they say, okay, we're evacuating data center A as a hypothetical. You know, these 30 applications backed by these 27 databases, all needs to go. Great. Get the plan, do some proof of concepts, do all the analysis, do all the math. Everybody signs off on it. Looks good. Move it. Data warehouse team calls up screaming. What happened? Where'd our data feed go? Why is it stuttering? Why is it timing out? I did a presentation, I cannot remember at which conference, a few years back, where I listed what I considered the top 5 challenges of cloud migration. Number 1 was lack of planning. 2, networking. 3, networking. 4, networking. And 5, networking. And they were all actually different aspects of networking.
Sure, but it's
okay. But to be fair, if we're going to blame networking, throughput is a networking problem. Latency is a physics problem, more often than not.
But, I mean, that's what it presents as, a networking challenge. I'm not saying the networking people can solve that. They can't. You're absolutely right. Application teams should know, and especially enterprise architecture teams, who are often the chief culprit for not realizing how many of their systems talk to each other directly in a hard dependency way, not just in a, it'd be nice if this worked way.
Sure.
And it's actually our standard assessments nowadays when we start a cloud migration project. That's what we start with looking at. Like, okay, what's your hardware? What's your sizing? You know, give me your CPU metrics, memory metrics, disk IO, IOPS latencies, things like this. We look at all that, and then we say, okay, now we're going to go into, I'll use Oracle for an example. We're going to go into Oracle, and we're going to look at all the configured database links, and we're going to look at, the networking logs and see who's been connecting from where. Can you account for all of these IPs? No, because almost nobody says yes first time.
Sure.
Okay, let's have a wider discussion. What's really talking to what? Because that's the thing we don't know about is the thing that will break when we cloud migrate.
Yeah, the concerns I've always heard when it comes to cloud migrations in general, they could probably all be summed up with networking, but like you said, very different, right? Security concerns. Security concerns are real. As is latency. Can I connect to this, to this imaginary cloud, like, are we going to be able to connect to this within the same and have the same performance? So yeah, security is a big concern, I'm sure, as well as the latency. So what are some of the other concerns you hear from customers that are trying to migrate?
The security concern, not just on networking, but in general, it really weighs on people's minds. And both out of general concern, there's been so many issues of late with ransomware and some very high profile damage being done to companies' brands, that it's on their minds, as well as, of course, getting security and compliance officers, for larger shops that have dedicated departments to this kind of thing, getting those people to sign off when they don't know what a cloud is. That's a definite challenge we've run into. A kind of project, and this really interested me. This kind of caught me by surprise. We've done 3 or 4 projects in the last year that were basically cloud DR projects, right? We're not evacuating our data center. We just need a copy of this stuff somewhere else, for disaster recovery purposes. But it wasn't standard physical disaster recovery. They already had that. This was isolated, network bubbled to this maximum degree possible ransomware recovery. Cloud environments that could only be fed like once a night, no binaries allowed in, just like the most recent backups from like prod databases, or maybe some configuration files when application configuration got pushed. And the whole point of this environment was, if the data centers got infested with ransomware, not the whole business, but some key segments of the business could flip to this cloud environment and continue to operate.
Yeah.
Which I thought was a really interesting idea. And that kind of project has heavy security and networking considerations, compliance, governance. You need to make sure that everything is as it should be. Everything is really firewalled off from the rest of the organization. Really interesting projects.
I'm curious, when you say that, are you talking about something like, I know VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery has like a pilot option where, you can actually have your data there, but you're not actually running it there. You just have it configured. And then in the event that you do the disaster, it takes a couple of minutes or maybe even an hour or so to get everything spun up and synchronized. But in essence, you're up and running, but you're just not paying for the full data center cost that you would.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah,
These
okay.
were very much kind of the pilot light, whatever you want to call it, kind of DR environments where the key data is there. Application servers, at least one of each type, are up and running at all times because there's automatic verification and validation happening on a daily basis that the system is still sane and workable. But the idea is that if ransomware hit, and suddenly it's emergency, pull the plug on everything in the data center, to stop the spread. Instead of being out of business for a couple weeks, like seems to happen to a lot of these companies that get very publicly damaged by ransomware, instead, you just unplug your main data center, shut everything down, devote a couple people to spinning up your cloud DR environment, connect some applications. And of course, you have to be ready for this. You have to have a run book. You have to have trained personnel. It's like anything else. You have to test it every once in a while. But the theory there being, within a few hours, your core business is back in business.
So I know you've done a ton of different migrations, and the one I heard, which I found interesting, was the Scottish government. Is there anything, or even if it's similar to that environment, is there anything you can share in terms of some of the key takeaways that you had with that migration?
Yeah, that was kind of a fun one. It wasn't a huge one by volume. So we were working with the government of Scotland, and that's a specific department that I was dealing with, which is, I'm going to get this wrong, and they're going to be mad at me. Agricultural and Rural something. The acronym was ARE. Nope. I'm going to be in trouble. I'm going to get an angry call from some Scottish people.
Let's look it up.
And when I worked with these folks, they were really dealing with some of these legacy things that they were kind of scared to touch, right? The application stack was Oracle products top to bottom. Oracle databases, Oracle application servers, WebLogic, Oracle Application Express, WebLogic clustering, this whole gone all in on some Oracle technologies that, by this point in time, they were a little bit long in the tooth. It was older versions of stuff. And they really didn't have the will or the budget to sort of reinvent things. They wanted to. They wanted to refactor. They wanted to redevelop these applications, but it wasn't going to happen for years. And they knew that. So what they said was, well, we've managed to get this stuff virtualized. You know, it originally had started on dedicated physical server sort of installations in their data center, but they'd gotten it into VMware in their on-prem environment. We're pretty happy with that, and didn't want to try and really muck it about too much further. So what I said to them was, you need to get this to the cloud. You really want to get better flexibility. They'd had some capacity problems with on-prem data centers.
Sure.
They were kind of worried about the health of this application in the future, not currently. It was currently running well. And so they said, what if we went to VMware Cloud and AWS with this? Would that be nice and easy? And that was satisfying sort of two initiatives for them. One, like I said, get this stuff on a modern platform where they didn't have future capacity concerns, you know, and could kind of rest easy that it was running well, buying them time to modernize it. And then part two was they kind of wanted it to talk to some other applications that were in the design and development phase still, but were probably going to be coming up natively in an AWS environment. And they were concerned about what we talked about earlier, which is the whole latency problem. You know, it never really works out well to have an application on premise talk to a database in the cloud or vice versa, just because there's a long distance link in between. And especially for OLTP type traffic,
we can't just wave our hand and say WAN acceleration, you know?
I'm sure there's a vendor that will do that for you. They'll wave that hand and take your money and say it's going to be okay. So we said, you know what? VMware Cloud and AWS is the natural fit for this. And if we just take these VMs, don't have to do anything to them at all, just need to configure the cloud environment. We used VMware HCX at the time, this was a couple years back, as it was kind of new and cutting edge, more so at the time, as a great way to do LAN extension across the stretched link between the on-prem data center, the on-prem vCenter, and the cloud vCenter, so that we could move things without having to re-IP anything. We could just stream them up in the background, and when the copy was complete, cut over. And then there were some additional resources that we looked at just protecting in a DR fashion from on-prem to the cloud as well. And the neat thing about that project, because like I said, it was smaller scale. I've done huge ones. This was, you know, a small handful of VMs. But what was neat about it is that from initiation to first VM running in the cloud was a few weeks. We came in and said, okay, you know, you've already called your VMware rep. You've got your VMware Cloud in AWS account configured. I'm going to walk you through the basics of configuring your first cluster in your SDDC, and we're going to set up HCX, and I'm going to walk you through that. We're going to document this. You know, we're going to do it with your staff. There was a strong enablement portion of this. They really wanted to not be dependent on an outside expert, which is the way to do it. You know, take advantage of outside experts to train your staff up on how to do this stuff, and then your staff can do it in the future. We did all of that, and a few weeks later, yeah, the first VMs were coming online in the cloud, running fine, going through acceptance testing. Honestly, the biggest problem we had, and I don't think anybody would have this now, but at the time, VMware HCX was such a newer product. It was revving pretty quick at the time. And of course, being a cloud-based product, you know, you're just going to log in someday and find there's a new version. You didn't know it was there. There it is. And that happened to us. We had done initial POC, and it was good, and it was fine, and we liked it, and we liked everything we were doing. And then we went in one day to do a batch of production migrations, and it's like, welcome to the new HCX. Here, change your setup. And I'm like, what? Oh, no. And then we kind of got stuck because the new product was so new that they'd moved around some options and the style that certain things were configured in. We ended up having to go through VMware support to find out, like, okay, is this documented? Where's the new documentation? You push the product out a day before the documentation. Something like that had happened. We eventually got it sorted out, but it was amusing to me that our biggest technical challenge was just the product was gaining features too quickly. We couldn't keep up with it. So great outcomes. They were really happy about it. We got to speak about that at VMworld in 2019. Sorry, that pandemic-shaped hole in my mental calendar is hard to navigate around. Yes, 2019. The last real VMworld until now, I think they're starting to get back up to full size.
Yeah. And HCX has definitely come a long way from then. And it obviously, it's in my opinion, from what I hear from a lot of folks, it's the game changer for a lot of migrations. Are you still using HCX for a lot of your migrations?
Yeah, where it makes sense. Like I said, we're somewhat cloud agnostic. There are a lot of advantages to VMware Cloud at AWS. So when that is the right fit for a customer, sure, it's absolutely the tool we're going to pull out. Every once in a while, depending on what they want to do, as I was speaking about earlier, sometimes it's not just cloud migration, it's cloud DR. Site recovery is a tool we use pretty extensively as well. I think our most recent VMware Cloud on AWS project was in the last 6 months, and that was more site recovery because that particular customer had wanted to, let's start using the cloud as a DR platform, get comfortable, do some tests, switch over, switch back. Once we're sure that it runs production well, we'll do a final switch over and then create another cloud account somewhere else to be the new DR and start to decommission on-prem resources. So every once in a while you see a cloud migration that almost looks like a DR implementation project at first, just because someone's being very, very cautious or has doubts about network latency, overall performance, things like this. So they kind of want to set everything up to dip a toe, try it, and then commit.
No, I like that ability to test, and HCX it's come so far along, and I love the ability to test together and migrate applications together. Just, long distance vMotioning and throwing things over one at the time. Like once you kick those off, it's like, when is this going to be done? I don't know. Well, I want to be around. We want to have eyes on glass. This is an important app when the vMotion finishes. Well, I can't decide when it finishes. Like that was always a fun discussion with people on migrations. It was kind of a, you were throwing the ball across the river, but it might show up an hour later. It might show up 4 hours later. And this whole ability to test in a bubble, have a clean state, bring stuff up together, and just avoid all those challenges, it's pretty handy.
That last piece is so key, the bring stuff up together. You really don't want to get into weird split state problems where, like you said, you've thrown the ball and the tiny app servers come up fast because they were small and copied quickly, but the database is still chugging along in the background. It's going to be 6 more hours before it's ready to come up in the cloud. And the
warehouse moved over, so you've got like this weird ping pong. Like I've seen it was an airline who they were doing a migration between data centers, and they ended up using Golden Gate or something to solve the problem long term. But it ended up to where like they literally were playing ping pong across the WAN link 6 times as part of an application, because the load balancer was here, the middleware was there, the app was here, the database was here, and it's anytime it's fine if it's just some tiny queries, but anytime you get a large flow. Or a backup job, God forbid. Yeah, the backups are here. The backup proxy's here, and then the data domain appliance is there. All of this. Being able to, as a group, walk together and not have to play, ping pong is always good.
And it's super key. It really is. I have seen so many of the pain and heartaches that my customers experience in cloud migrations come from stuff like you just said, where they're smart enough to avoid application servers and database servers not being local to one another. They get that. That gets done right. But the load balancers that do the internet front end, security won't sign off on a cloud load balancer. So the on-prem load balancer it's taking traffic from the internet, funneling it up to a cloud environment. The reply is coming down to a cloud environment to on-prem, back out through the load balancers, back out across the public internet. And they go, well, we moved it to the cloud and the latency got twice as bad. My usual response is, after seeing that kind of architecture, only twice? You're lucky. That could have been a lot worse.
No, it sounds pretty good. So
I love it. Well, Nick, I know we're running out of time. I did want to ask you one last question. You do a lot of migrations. You do a lot of consulting for a lot of companies, regardless of the cloud, regardless of the vendors. I'm curious what advice you have to customers that are considering to move to the cloud. What can they do to actually start that journey?
Well, there's a lot to do there. And okay, you asked me a question that I can give a 45-minute talk on, and that's not hypothetical. I have. So let's boil this down just a little bit. Let's get this back down to a reasonable scale. If you're thinking about cloud migration, take a look at what you've got, identify your difficult pieces. As I said earlier, your difficult pieces, you should be aware of them even if you're not going to tackle them first like I'd recommend. And then be a little bit wary about cloud lock-in issues. You know, by all means, if you have tech staff that is really, really good at Azure, maybe from previous employment, or really, really good at AWS, or really, really good at GCP, okay, that becomes a natural target. But don't be afraid where it makes sense to embrace a multi-cloud approach.
Sure.
There's a lot of power that can be had there. And take an honest look at your application estate and what needs modernization before you're going to get any real benefits from cloud scalability, flexibility, you know, the ability to flex up and down over time, these sorts of things. If you're realistic about those things, and then really ask yourself, why are you doing this? And that's a fascinating question to ask anybody, and I ask all my customers. You know, they call me and they say, we want to go to the cloud. Here's our problems. I say, why do you want to go to the cloud? A surprisingly popular answer is, the board said so. But yeah, you get that answer. But sometimes people say, you know, it's cost savings. You know, we're getting killed on leases for our colo facilities, hardware refresh cycles.
Yeah.
You know, some people say it's tech driven. You know, we have hot new app coming online. We need to be able to rapidly expand it and scale it. Cloud's the place to be. So you can have financial reasons, political reasons, technical reasons. Balancing those and planning a migration with an eye towards gaining the benefits of the particular reason you have for doing a cloud migration and not trying to do everything at once is really key to getting a successful cloud migration where at the end of it, everybody from the C-level and executive suites down is happy with the outcomes.
I like it. Well said. Yeah, that's the short version. The long version I know has been seen on several of your blogs, several of your sessions at various conferences, and so I will definitely leave links to those in the show notes of this podcast. But Nick, that was awesome, man. I appreciate you taking time to chat with us today.
Always a good time. I welcome the opportunity to come back whenever.
Awesome. Good stuff. All right. Well, that music tells me it's time to go. And so if you want to get in touch with us, send us an email at podcast@vmware.com. You can subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice by searching Virtually Speaking Podcast. You can catch this in all episodes at vspeakingpodcast.com. Again, a big thanks to Nick for joining us this week. We're back next time, but until then, bye for now. Nick, that was amazing, man. I really appreciate it.